A wind-cold mist clung to the waters of Hampton Roads that night, a ghostly curtain that blurred the edges of the harbor. The moon hung low, half hidden by clouds, casting faint silvery reflections on the water. Wooden Union warships floated in the darkness like skeletons of a bygone age, their masts swaying gently, rigging creaking in the subtle breeze. Below the surface, the Confederate ironclad CSS Virginia glided forward, her hull slicing silently through the black water. The air was thick with tension, the smell of brine mingled with the acrid scent of coal smoke from her boilers. On board, the crew could feel it, a singular, chilling anticipation that stretched tighter with every turn of the paddle wheel. They were about to challenge the most formidable naval blockade in the world, in a theater where the very concept of warfare was about to be redefined. One miscalculation could hand the Confederacy control of Hampton Roads and change history. But even as the Virginia moved silently toward her prey, the world outside did not yet know the shadow that was about to fall over the harbor.
The story begins months earlier with the fall of Norfolk and the abandonment of the Gosport Naval Yard. The Union Navy, in haste and fear, scuttled several ships, including the steam frigate USS Merrimack. They burned her upper works, yet left the hull largely intact. Confederate engineers and shipwrights, seizing the opportunity, raised the vessel from the mud, rebuilt her decks, and plated her in iron. She was reborn as CSS Virginia, a floating fortress of steel and determination. It was more than a ship. It was a symbol of Southern ingenuity and desperation. The Confederacy had few naval resources, but with this iron leviathan, Secretary of the Navy Stephen Mallory hoped to pierce the Union blockade that strangled Southern ports. For months, Virginia's construction became a story whispered along the eastern seaboard, a potential game-changer in a war largely fought on land. Union leaders were aware of the threat. Wooden ships, no matter how heavily armed, were little match for an armored juggernaut. Hampton Roads, the wide expanse where the James, Elizabeth, and Nansemond rivers converged, became a choke point of extraordinary strategic importance. Losing control of these waters could mean the collapse of the Union's blockade along Virginia's coast. The Union responded with innovation. The USS Monitor, designed by John Ericsson, was unlike any ship the world had seen. Low to the water, flat, almost inconspicuous, she carried a revolutionary feature, a 20-foot revolving turret housing two massive Dahlgren guns. Unlike traditional broadside ships, the Monitor could fire in any direction without turning her hull. Within 100 days, she was built, tested, and deployed, a desperate gamble by the Union to counter the iron menace of the Virginia. By early March 1862, the tension was almost tangible. Virginia lay ready in Norfolk. Wooden Union ships floated in precarious security along the blockade. Engineers, sailors, and officers on both sides knew that the coming days would not resemble any naval engagement that had come before.
March 8th, the maiden voyage. As dawn broke, the Virginia slipped out of the Elizabeth River. Steam hissed from her boilers, mingling with the morning mist, curling in ghostly tendrils along her armored sides. The deck was alive with activity. Sailors in rough cotton shirts and woolen coats manned their stations, gripping ropes and cannons, their breath forming clouds in the frigid morning air. Officers barked orders with precision, aware that a single mistake could doom the mission before it began. At 2 p.m., the Virginia struck first. The massive iron ram collided with the USS Cumberland, a 24-gun sloop of war. The sound was a thunderclap, followed by the groaning of timbers under stress. Water gushed into the Cumberland's hull as sailors scrambled to save themselves. Within minutes, she began to sink, her decks disappearing beneath the waves. Confederate sailors cheered. But the Virginia, though victorious, bore the scars of impact. The ram she had used to devastate the Cumberland was now damaged,
a reminder that even iron was vulnerable to brute force. The Virginia's assault did not stop. It moved on to the USS Congress, a wooden frigate attempting to reposition. The Congress ran aground deliberately, but Confederate cannon fire tore into her decks. Flames erupted across the wooden superstructure, sending thick black smoke curling into the sky. Sailors abandoned ship, clambering into lifeboats or jumping into the frigid water. For over 4 hours, the Virginia ruled Hampton Roads. The thunder of her guns echoed across the water, and for a moment it seemed that the Union blockade would crumble entirely. As the day waned, the Confederate commanders faced a practical choice. Tides were falling. The shallows threatened to entrap the Virginia, and without adequate depth, her iron plates could not guarantee safety. Slowly, deliberately, she withdrew to Norfolk, leaving the wreckage of wooden vessels behind. The Cumberland sunk, the Congress burned and surrendered, and more than 200 Union sailors killed or wounded.
March 8th, evening, arrival of the Monitor. The night fell and the harbor held its breath once again. Through the mist, a strange, low silhouette appeared, the USS Monitor, silent, almost spectral in her squat design. Lieutenant John L. Worden, standing at the pilot house, could barely make out the distant glint of the Virginia's iron plates. Below deck, crewmen checked the doggerings, readied ammunition, and adjusted steam valves. The air was thick with coal smoke and the damp chill of the harbor. For the men aboard the Monitor, this was more than a battle. It was a test of faith in innovation itself. They had no experience against ironclads like the Virginia, and yet their vessel represented a bold gamble, a tiny, low-profile craft designed to challenge the very definition of naval warfare. The men whispered to one another, hearts hammering against ribs, as the first hints of cannon fire from the previous day's engagement still echoed faintly across the water.
March 9th, the clash of titans. Early the next morning, the Virginia returned. Acting Commander Catesby Jones had taken charge. Flag Officer Franklin Buchanan had been wounded in prior engagements. The Virginia steamed forward with determination, her iron plates reflecting the pale light of dawn. Below decks, Confederate gunners gripped their weapons, aware that the Monitor now blocked their path. The two ironclads faced each other across Hampton Roads. The morning was still, broken only by the hiss of steam, the slap of water against iron, and the distant cries of seagulls unsettled by the smoke. Then, without warning, first fire. For the next 4 hours, iron met iron. Unlike the previous day, when wood had offered little resistance, cannonballs bounced harmlessly off steel. The Monitor's revolving turret allowed her guns to track the Virginia, delivering punishment from angles the Confederates could not anticipate. Inside, men like Lewis N. Stoddard felt the concussions of each blast reverberate through their bones. At one moment, a direct hit sent him sprawling across the deck, unconscious for precious minutes. On the Virginia, gunners strained to land shots on the Monitor. Every angle, every approach was studied meticulously, yet her low profile made effective strikes nearly impossible. Officers shouted above the roar of battle, trying to direct their crews, while smoke and steam choked vision and air. The ironclad circled and fired, a deadly ballet of steel on water. At one point, a Confederate shell struck the Monitor's forward pilot house. Lieutenant Worden, peering through the iron shutters, was temporarily blinded by flying splinters and burning powder. Crewmen rushed to his side, carrying him below deck. He gasped, "Do not mind me, save the Minnesota if you can." Despite damage in chaos, the Monitor held her ground. The Virginia, exhausted, low on steam and ammunition, began to withdraw towards Norfolk. Neither ironclad had been destroyed, yet the very clash of steel, the deafening roar of repeated broadsides, and the acrid smoke that choked both sides had redefined naval combat forever.
In the aftermath, both sides claimed victory. The Confederates pointed to their destruction of the Cumberland and Congress, their survival despite intense Union fire. The Union emphasized that the Monitor had prevented the Virginia from breaking the blockade and had protected key ships like the USS Minnesota. The Virginia returned to Norfolk for repairs, but her life was short-lived. With Union forces advancing during the Peninsula Campaign, Confederate forces scuttled her in May 1862 to avoid capture. The Monitor, though revolutionary, met her end in December 1862, sinking off Cape Hatteras during a storm. Yet the legacy of Hampton Roads endured. The battle marked the end of wooden warships' dominance and heralded the age of armored, steam-powered vessels. Navies around the world took notice. Turret-mounted guns, low-profile armored hulls, and steam propulsion would become the future of naval warfare.
On that misty night in Hampton Roads, history hung by a thread. The Virginia had nearly overturned the Union's blockade. The Monitor had prevented disaster, and both had demonstrated the terrifying and transformative power of innovation. The roar of iron on water, the flashes of cannon, the cries of sailors, and the shuddering of decks told a story far greater than victory or defeat. It was a story of a new era dawning. As the sun rose over the harbor, illuminating the twisted remnants of wooden ships, the battered silhouettes of ironclads, and the smoky fog lifting from the water, one truth remained clear. Hampton Roads had been saved, but the world had glimpsed the future. And that night, when a Confederate ironclad nearly took the old harbor, humanity saw that courage, ingenuity, and the relentless force of iron could reshape history forever.